Welcome back to Analytical Media. Today we will discuss Stephen King, Carl Jung, and Archetypes and how it all goes together. We will also discuss the television show The Fugitive. Stephen King might be the writer of his generation. His books were immensely popular. Movies based on his books were immensely popular. He was amazingly prolific. So he's not just somebody who wrote some things sometimes and got a few things published. And it doesn't mean that guy's opinion wouldn't have been good, but when you find someone who is outdone by no one in his time period, he was somebody special. Whether you liked his stuff or you didn't like his stuff, many of you liked his stories, his horror type stories when you were teenagers. If you don't know who Stephen King is or what he meant to America, look it up. Do some research. You probably do know because you probably read his stuff when you were a teenager or saw some of his movies. He was immensely popular. Why was he immensely popular? Why is any author popular? Any screenwriter? What makes one book sell and another book not sell? Well, there may be something to it psychologically. And I'm not suggesting that Stephen King did this. However, I am saying Sylvester Stallone definitely did this because he wrote about it. We'll talk about that in a second. But what I'm saying is I respect Stephen King. Most people should. Whether you like his stuff or not, you should respect him because he was so amazingly successful. And here's what he says about The Fugitive. The Fugitive broke all the stereotypes. It was at the time, and still is when you see the reruns, absolutely the best series done on American television. There was nothing better than The Fugitive. It just turned everything on its head. He also says The Fugitive was a groundbreaking television series because it featured a hero who was totally powerless. Everybody who watched The Fugitive would identify with Richard Kimble. David Jansen, who played Richard Kimble, spoke for a whole generation of people. Kids like me, who grew up feeling slightly alienated from all the values of our parents. We felt like fugitives in a sense. The Greek chorus that was heard from one end of the country to another was, "Turn that goddamn thing down." Our music changed, our mores changed. And I looked at that guy and I said, yes, I feel like him. I know what it's like to be falsely accused. And I loved the way Kimble lived, to be able to move from town to town like that. He was the sort of character that people at the time wanted to sublimate themselves into. He loved The Fugitive. Many people did. The concluding episode of The Fugitive was the biggest event in television history. If you're not familiar, let me just give you a little background. The character, Richard Kimble, was a medical doctor, a pediatrician, and one day his wife was murdered and the police blamed it on Richard Kimble. Richard Kimble blamed it on a one-armed man that he saw running from his house, a man with one arm. Richard Kimble went on trial. He was found guilty, sentenced to death. On his way being transported to the prison, the train crash that he was on. He broke free of the crash, got out, started to run, more or less for his life. He was sentenced to death. The man that was bringing him to prison was Lieutenant Gerard. And for years, Richard Kimble tried to find the one-armed man to prove his innocence. And he would go across the country searching out clues from newspaper articles he would find mentioning the one-armed man or a criminal with one. Along the way, he would go from town to town across America, and he would help people that he came in contact with. He helped people everywhere he went. He made friends everywhere he went. After all, he was a great guy. He was not really guilty of any crime. He was falsely accused. And that may be the first place where we have archetypal identification, because we've all been falsely accused, I'm sure. Plenty of close calls. Great acting, by the way, by David Jansen, Barry Morse, who played Lieutenant Gerard, a really hateable guy, which proves how good an actor he was. And this all led up to the finale of the series, and that finale was the event of a lifetime, at least a lifetime of television, because this was in the 60s. There were millions of viewers of television, and the biggest audience ever to watch a television event was the conclusion, the final episode of The Fugitive. And for the next 10 years, nothing took a better or bigger audience share than did The Fugitive. For 10 years, for the next 10 years. It was the biggest in television history and remained that way for 10 years. Now, the number of people watching TV grew, the population of America grew, and it was the finale of a well-loved giant hit television show, MASH, that broke that record, broke The Fugitive's record. So, some of the best actors that we knew from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they were on this show. They appeared in various episodes of the show. It was filmed on location, much of it, in different parts of the country. So why was this show so successful? And it was a one-of-a-kind, remember. It drew the biggest television audience for its finale in the history of television. Why? Why are some television shows successful and some aren't? Some movies successful and some aren't? Now let's go back to Sylvester Stallone, who wrote the phenomenally successful movie Rocky. How did he do it? Well, he claims that he went to libraries and studied mythology, figures from mythology, mythological stories, and using that as a basis, perhaps no more than inspiration, he wrote the movie Rocky. Now that was a big hit. And if he never accomplished any other thing in life, he should be remembered for and applauded for writing that movie. He wrote it. So the story goes, and it may not be completely factual, but I've heard it many times told different ways, but the story went, he wrote it. He had someone submit it to a movie studio. They read it. They liked it, and they offered him an enormous amount of money. And at the time, he was broke, completely broke. And there are stories about it, and you can look it up and read it, and you might have a more factual, accurate depiction that you find than the one I'm telling you. But this is basically the story. And they said, we'll buy it. And it wasn't for a lot, too much. It was a fortune back then, and to him, it was a large amount. And it was something like $50,000, which is still a lot. And he said, okay, I'll sell it to you, but I got to play Rocky. And they laughed and said, no way, because he had done almost nothing. He played a minor role as a sort of a tough gang member wearing a leather jacket, almost nothing. They laughed at him and said, no. And so then they came back to him. And they said, look, we're going to up the offer, double it, triple it. And he said, great, I'll sell it to you, but I've got to play Rocky. They said, no. And they kept increasing the offer. And I believe, and this could be false, but it follows the storyline. He was offered like $1 million. He said, yes, I've got to play Rocky. And they said, okay, you can play Rocky. And I don't know that anyone else could have played Rocky better than he did. And I don't know there's a living actor that could have done that. He wrote it. He was the actor. Our applause goes out to Sylvester. Now, did that happen that way exactly? I don't know. But it certainly has been depicted that way hundreds of times. So he was studying mythology at the library and writing this at the library. Mythology is where you will find the first evidence and beginnings of archetypes. They were there before recorded history, of course, so we can't say where and what the stories were. It was never recorded, but once writing was developed, we can follow Roman mythology and Greek mythology and the characters that make up those stories. Those characters, and sometimes the plot of the story itself, is archetypal. And perhaps that explains the success of Rocky, the archetype. And there are many writers, well-known, famous writers, who follow archetypes, believe in archetypes, research archetypes. But that's where a psychologist or a good researcher, a good professor who studies this type of thing would have more knowledge than any writer would about the archetype. We go back to The Fugitive now. Tremendously successful show. Unbelievably successful. One of a kind. It held the record for 10 years. The largest audience ever. It broke every record and held that record for 10 years. Why? Perhaps because of the archetype. I would suggest it is because of the archetype. Also, Jung tells us that modern day examples of archetypes are comic book heroes, Superman, Batman, and the popularity of those comic books never goes away. Simple stories, simple characters that go by various names, but who have similar superpowers. Those are archetypes. Jung believed in two unconscious minds. The personal unconscious mind, which everybody has, and you enter when you go to sleep at night, and it's with you all day long. For instance, have you ever heard a song, listened to a song, and from even a commercial for a certain product, there's a little song that goes with it, and in the back of your mind all day long, that song, that commercial, that little rhyme, that little melody is playing in the back of your head, and you can't get rid of it. You're doing something, and boom, it starts to play. Where does that come from? It comes from the same place dreams come from, the unconscious mind. Now, the unconscious mind, as I said, could be personal, just yours and yours alone. But the other unconscious mind that you tap into is the collective unconscious, which everyone has. Everyone that's ever lived has shared that collective unconscious. You could go there. You can get the information that's stored there, and you will. That's where archetypes live. Archetypes are patterns, symbols. Now, and there are many, many, many archetypes. Some very famous, the anima, the animus, many archetypes. And the archetype is a way that we have of experiencing the world, of quantifying it, qualifying it. We see it in archetypal structures. Archetype. An example I've always used when I taught was the boy archetype, the prince archetype, and the man archetype, or the king archetype. And we can simplify it for our purposes and say the prince and the king were the prince and the adult male to bring this to bear. Now, again, we can look at Elvis Presley, who's been dead for a very long time, but whose following still grows. I read some time back that he was selling as many records then as he had at the peak of his career. Just a few years ago, 20 years maybe after he was dead, maybe more. Had an amazing impact on the world. There were sightings after he was dead. There were sightings of him for years all over the country. Called into the police stations. An interesting fact. Why did these things happen? Well, that's psychology. That's something to look at, because it is an amazingly complex, complicated world, much more so than we understand. Now, we can see him, let's say we have a role to fill, and it's the role of king, the ruler, the leader, the adult male, and then the prince. So we have those two roles, and we have two archetypes. We have the role of the prince to fill, and we have the role of the king, or the adult male. Both roles need to be filled. And we have two people to fill those roles. One would be Josh Brolin, and one would be Elvis Presley. Even though Elvis died at 42 years of age, he was a middle-aged man. Who do you pick as the king and who do you pick as the prince? Well, for most people, it would be obvious that Elvis would be the prince. He maintained a boyish quality, always, and fit the role perfectly. Josh Brolin, he's the man. I'm sure at 25 he was the man. He has that quality, that character. He fits the archetypal image of a man. The king, the ruler, and not the boyish image. Elvis Presley always talked about his mother. He loved his mother very much. He bought her everything. That, to me, demonstrates a boyish quality. And if you're not familiar with Elvis Presley, which you may not be, as a social phenomenon, you should do the research. He was the love interest of millions of women. He was so perfect. They loved him. The way he talked, the way he moved, what he did, everything about him. Many documentaries have been done concerning this, worth looking into. If you care about human nature, mankind, understanding existence, you need to understand all of those things. Why Elvis was so popular. He was so popular because he fit the prince archetype so very well. If you had a movie being produced on the life of John Wayne, who would you pick to play John Wayne in the movie? Elvis Presley or Josh Brolin? Those are archetypes. Jung's idea of the archetype, according to Jung, was a bridge to matter in general. We're talking about physics now, saying the archetype is a psychic entity, but it is more fundamentally a bridge to matter in general. Jung used the term unus mundus to describe the unitary reality that he believed underlies all manifest phenomena, observable or perceivable things that exist in the physical world, everything around you, the tree, the rock, the car. He conceived of archetypes as the mediators of the unus mundus organization, not only organizing ideas in the psyche, but also the fundamental principles of matter and energy in the world, the physical world. This aspect of the archetype impressed Nobel laureate physicist Wolfgang Pauli, who embraced Jung's concept and believed that the archetype provided a link between physical events and the mind of the scientist studying them. This echoed the positions adopted by German astronomer Johann Kepler. Thus, the archetypes that order our perceptions and ideas are themselves the product of an objective order that transcends both the human mind and physical matter. Yes, it gets to be complicated, and it's not simple, but everyone can understand this if they care to try. Does anyone fully understand it? Probably not. But a basic understanding, which is all anyone has, can be had by anyone who tries, anyone of average intelligence. But it does make the world a much more complicated place. And quantum physics isn't mentioned here because this was really before much quantum physics or the popularity of, but it's explainable through, it fits quantum physics. Jung believed that archetypes guide the individuation process towards self-realization or self-actualization. We've talked about that. The similarity between Jung and Maslow, that archetypes guide the process that leads you towards self-actualization. Why are some stories, movies, so popular and others not? Why has Stephen King's work been so popular? Why has Sylvester Stallone's work been so popular? Why was the movie so popular? Star Wars, immensely popular, changed culture. Why? Well, the writer of Star Wars invited a Jungian analyst to his property to live at his guest house for a summer as they worked on the script for Star Wars. Luke Skywalker, the king or the prince, the adult male or the prince, good and evil, basic theme of all stories and of archetypes. And how about the popularity of The Fugitive? Well, many people believe that the script, the creation of The Fugitive, was based on the 1862 novel Les Miserables, where Kimble filled in for Jean Valjean and Lieutenant Gerard for Inspector Javert. How many books, Broadway musicals have been generated, plays, musicals, Broadway or otherwise, been generated for Les Miserables. And many writers do study these things to try to create a hit movie, a hit book, a bestseller. This is a big topic, and some of you will be very interested in deeper things, analyzing the mystery of life. You have a curious mind. Writers will like to know how better to put together submissions, to write stories to submit that will appeal to the public. Physicists would be familiar with the transition from the mind to the quantum state. I think you can still watch The Fugitive on Tubi, I believe. Tubi, Tubi. I think they might be running it one show at a time on MeTV also at this moment. But you'll find it. It'll be around forever. Highly regarded. It's one of the best programs ever. At least Stephen King thought so. And I think that man knows what he's talking about. He certainly has the credentials, the bona fides, as they say. If you've enjoyed this, recommend it to a friend, subscribe, do all those things you're used to doing if you like something. And we at Analytical Media hope you did like it. If you have any follow-up questions, follow-up thoughts, anything you'd like to add, write us or put it in the comments. We will address it. So from all of us at Analytical Media, we wish you the best. Hope everything works out for you in life. Please take care.